I would wake up every day with suicidal ideations and looking to not check out as much as just longing for the day I could check out, and I went from that to now I wake up pretty stoked about every day and happy. And it wasn't like an easy transition. And I don't feel like that's ever like a process that ever stops. It's like exercise in the sense, like if you want to run marathons, you don't stop training to run marathons to still be effective at running marathons. You have to continuously train and better yourself. And I feel like mental health is a skill set just like that. I feel like we're isolated, not only isolated, but live in our own little kingdoms and palaces now, like our houses. It's like we're supposed to value all these things. And in that process, I feel like we've lost a little bit of our spirituality and our soul. And I feel like by doing that, we stop valuing what we think is important and we start valuing what people tell us is important. And I think by doing that, we lose a little bit ourselves. And I think that's why you're seeing such an increase in mental health issues. That's why you're seeing so much depression and anxiety. A lot of the countries I spent time in, it seems like the less technologically advanced they are, the healthier and happier they are. I think the easiest way to identify trauma is simply, if there's something wrong. We all feel that misalignment. And if you feel that misalignment, if you're having issues with sleep, if you, one of the big ones was I was always told that I was quick to go from 0 to 10. It wasn't until I started meditating that I identified that I was always at a 10. I was just not always able to manage it. So once I identified that I was at a 10, and I did that through learning how to detach from the situation that is, and being able to process and become familiar with that internal dialogue. And then once you become internally curious and inquisitive, you're able to identify at different levels. Like back then, like it was either on or off, I was either triggered or I wasn't. And I never really understood that there was processes that were happening before that. I think that there's power in nature and power in detaching from those connections of social media and just spend 5-10 minutes a day alone with yourself and your thoughts. Just give it an opportunity. Just be like, check in, be like, hey, what's up? Because I feel like there's not a lot of, before I got my mental health journey, I never did that. I did what you talked about, working so hard. I always had to stay busy. If I wasn't being productive, I was a failure, and I feel like the better version of you that you can be, the better version you can be in every aspect of your life. I think that there's a huge piece that's being missed, and I hope to change it. I think that there is a process of preparing for trauma, because it's not if you're going to experience trauma, it's when you're going to experience trauma. We all will. It doesn't matter like who you are.
Sifu Slim. Big aloha to all of you people tuning in from two people who've spent a fair amount of time on the island of Oahu. I've been to some of the other islands too. All told, I've probably lived on the Hawaiian Islands during my life something over 2 years and a few months, and maybe I've been there six or seven different times. Love the islands, love the aloha spirit. And my take is that it's in a crisis situation. Not that there weren't times 150 years ago, 500 years ago, other times in the past when there weren't crises in the Hawaiian Islands. But in my opinion, since the American takeover in the early 1900s of the Hawaiian Islands, it's been in a definite retrograde. And you can tell me what you think. I'm Sifu Slim. First of all, folks, please give us a thumbs up, consider subscribing, and please share your comments down below. Over to Jonathan for his take on who he is, and then what he thinks about what I said and what things he might differ on about the Hawaiian Islands.
Jonathan, I'm the host of Normalize PTSD. I've been out here for about 12 years now. Deal a lot with UXO removal, and I remove exploded ordnance on the island in my civilian life. And currently, as a hobby, I like to dive into mental health, spirituality, just trying to get a better understanding of who I am and just be an overall better person. So, Yeah, I would say current state of Hawaii. Well, the weather's beautiful, the island's beautiful, the people are beautiful. So that's still a thing. As well as the crises and the political stances on I guess where we're at now in Hawaii. Yeah, I would find I don't really know the words because that's not really an area I dive into much. I seek positivity, and I feel like that's an area of conflict. So
Yeah.
I don't necessarily avoid it, but when the topic comes up, it depends on who you're talking to, the side of the fence that they lean toward. But yeah, if there's more specific question you want to ask on that regard, then we could definitely dive into it because I do find that topic fascinating
Yeah,
for sure.
I guess what I should say is that I do want to be positive. I do want to uplift people's lives, no question about that. But if
Hmm.
you do see a problem, you first have to identify the problem if you want to remedy parts of the problem or move it towards some better level. Your son or your daughter has an issue with their teeth. You identify that issue, maybe yourself, maybe a family member's got some ideas, and then you go to the dentist and maybe the oral surgeon, whatever you need to do, and you identify these things and you take action. And I think no different than when you go to Hawaii, no matter when you went there, you always saw areas that were working better than others, and the ones that weren't working so well and were creating disharmony, you might have wanted to share a thought, listen to a person, ask for solutions. And that's what I think I saw in Hawaii. There was a lot of unnecessary trauma. And I know our conversation is going
Mm.
to deal with some trauma, but when you find Hawaiian people who had great grandparents who owned 100 acres and they got kicked off of that land by seedy, shady deals in the government and people paying off the government official. And now those grandkids, great grandkids, great great grandkids are homeless or dysfunctional. They they see that past and they don't really know what to do about solving that past trauma. So we don't have to belabor that anymore. I'll just leave that as an open thought for people to ponder. And
Mm.
Jonathan, take us into the world of trauma and how you were able to identify a skill set that you had and what motivated you to go in and operate in that field and make make change in people's lives.
Absolutely. To speak to what you're talking about, about the Hawaii Islands, I do have a fun thought, and it's I was in a conversation with a lady who was very passionate about a certain topic. It wasn't necessarily something that I saw passionately, but I did have compassion for that. And I feel like that this is one of those topics too. Like, I don't think that we can all heal or fix everything. We just don't have the bandwidth for it, and we don't have the skill set for it sometimes. So I try to be purposeful with what I invest my time and effort into. So the only way that I see that I can make Hawaii better in a positive way is doing what I do and removing explosive ordnance. My historical background is I was explosive ordnance disposal technician in the military. So I'm a subject matter expert in explosives. They use this area since the 1940s as a bombing range. And there's a very large portion of the island that you can't even live on because of the ordinance and the
Where are
explosive
you?
safe. I'm on
Where?
the Big Island of Hawaii, but
Okay.
it's a problem that's on all the islands. I believe I've spent time on Molokai, Oahu, Maui, Kauai, like all the islands. They all have different levels of, I guess, explosive contamination, but I would say Big Island's probably the most significant still. So that's my efforts to make it a better place so that we can expand the areas that can become Hawaiian homes, cheaper homes for people to live on, because that's basically all the skill set I have. So then to lead into what led me to the mental health world, I came back from the military and I just assumed that my bitterness, my aggression, my disdain, and easily irritability, that was just all a consequence of coming back from war, because that's what warriors are. That's what warriors do. It wasn't until about a decade later that I realized that I was basically just I was suppressing, coping, And all the coping mechanisms that I was using were ones that I learned as a kid or I learned in the military. Like, yeah, that's how we deal with trauma. We drink, and we fight and we do that whole thing. So eventually it led me to marriage counseling to attempt to save a marriage. And after that, the therapist was like, you have PTSD. And I was like, yeah, no, I don't, and she's like, you do. And then it wasn't long after that, I swallowed my pride and I identified that I did have some sort of trauma that I needed to deal with. And after I'd say it's been about 9 years now of just learning and growing, I feel like we all level up. We all start at a level, So my level is very basic, So from that to now, I would wake up every day with suicidal ideations and looking to not check out as much as just longing for the day I could check out, And I went from that to now I wake up pretty stoked about every day and happy. And it wasn't like an easy transition. And I don't feel like that's ever like a process that ever stops, It's like exercise in the sense, like if you want to run marathons, you don't stop training to run marathons to still be effective at running marathons. You have to continuously train and better yourself. And I feel like mental health is a skill set just like that.
The idea of you discerning that you had PTSD, it's fascinating because you're a young person. You're in the military when you're what, early 20s?
Yes. Yes. I got out when I was 28.
So you're in there in your 20s, and your 20s weren't that long ago as compared to my 20s. So PTSD, which has been called a few different things, shell shock during World War One, in Vietnam. What did they call it? There was another word for it.
There's PTS, there's battle fatigue.
Battle fatigue.
I mean, if you go back all the way to the Spanish War, there's a lot of things they called it. And if anything, I feel like those vernaculars they're useful in the medical world. But I feel like when it gets out into the civilian world, the only thing it really does is really confuse us.
Yeah.
I feel like we would have made great strides in areas of mental health, of normalizing the conversation if we didn't keep changing the parameters of the conversation.
So you're hitting on some really good points. This whole idea of obfuscation, hiding problems. You've got these bombs. Well, the one part of the military is out of the budget or doesn't want to report their high budget, and some unexploded ordnance. Well, they hide that, and they can hide it for hundreds of years. And there's still bombs that are discovered in France, some from World War One that are probably no longer effective, just contamination, and some from World War Two, which 20 years from now will be at 100 years, that can still blow up a tank, or torpedoes that were stored somewhere that people didn't know about, that are 10 feet in length. And so these things last long times, and people might have either died and couldn't disarm them, or just walked away, or like the military on Hawaii and many places around the world, obfuscated and just said, oh no, that wasn't us. That wasn't us that has the unexploded ordnance. Tell me, Jonathan, if you know anything about those types of hiding and obfuscation situations with unexploded ordnance and contaminants.
Oh, well, Sifu, I think that is a problem. And it's not just in the countries that you mentioned. I think it's everywhere internationally. I've done a bit of international demining work and look to do more. And I know that we can see now that even in like Israel, the bombings that are going on there, not all those ordinances are going to explode. So there's going to be that explosive safety hazard that's going to be lingering. Or Burma, I think more people are killed in Burma from unexploded ordnance than anywhere in the world. No one even talks about Burma, And then like Ukraine is just littered with mines, whether it be Russian or Ukrainian, as well as the bombings and things that are impacting that. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of problems that are identified, and also it's a touchy point, I feel like, a bit, but I don't always feel like the funding that goes toward those efforts are always utilized in the most efficient ways possible. So I feel like my experience with certain places where a lot of the funding went to smooth the process, opposed to, fixing it, whether it be working with corrupt governments or working with corrupt organizations who needed to take their cut before you could actually go to make some sort of impact in the world.
The idea of a sustainable regenerative farm, which nothing but a sustainable regenerative farm existed until the 20th century. There were large farms before that, but there wasn't agribusiness with petrochemicals until the early 1900s in the West. And then, the petrochemicals, we had petrochemicals in America. We still do, but we had a lot, and we thought we had an endless supply when oil was discovered in Pennsylvania in the early 1900s. We thought we had an endless supply. Well, based on the small population and a lot of rural people dwelling that didn't need all this petrochemicals, like a rural farmhouse in my grandmother's area would have had one lamp bulb like hanging down from a wire in her bedroom if she had electricity. If she didn't, that was for many places not until the late 70s when they got rural electrification. Before that, of course, candles and burning oil and burning anything that they could control. So we have this huge growth of petrochemicals, and we have this idea of making a profit from feeding people at a very low cost as compared to the amount of man hours, people hours it took to raise animals in the old days. And it's amazing now that through my lifetime, we've gone through this incredible growth towards this powerful oil-dependent industry in manufacturing and in farming and in transportation. Now we've got people that are going back to bikes. Many people are going to e-bikes. People want to raise goats. People want to live on a small farm or a medium-sized farm, and they want to check out of this 10-hour or 12 or 16-hour busy business world or corporate world or even the military. If you look at the military, you see that oftentimes the people who get very little sleep and seem to be busy all the time, their supervisors think they're doing their job, even though they're really an imbalanced workaholic. So we've moved into this crazy zone of hyper productivity, all within the last 100 to 200 years. The Industrial Revolution in England happened before the United States. So 1700s till now, late 1700s, you see this too much of an emphasis on production and a lesser emphasis on living, community, connecting with family, the environment, teaching your kids, taking care of your elders, these types of things. So I said a mouthful, Jonathan. Love to hear your thoughts.
There's a lot to go over there, Sifu. So what jumped out to me there is that it's a personal passion and a personal thing that I value is I see that as a slave class. And I know that that's not the nice way to put it, but I see that we get stuck in these processes to value things that we really shouldn't value. And I feel like in the process that you talked about from the 1900s, 1920s, there's a lot of things that have changed since then, like the dynamics of the family, like how many family members are living in a family. Like I feel like we're isolated, not only isolated, but live in our own little kingdoms and palaces now, like our houses. It's like we're supposed to value all these things, and in that process I feel like we've lost a little bit of our spirituality and our soul. And I feel like by doing that, we stop valuing what we think's important, and we start valuing what people tell us is important. And I think by doing that, we lose a little bit ourselves. And I think that's why you're seeing such an increase in mental health issues. That's why you're seeing so much depression and anxiety. A lot of the countries I spent time in, it seems like the less technologically advanced they are, the healthier and happier they are, the less stress is. I remember talking to an interpreter in Afghanistan, and he's like, yeah, I lived in the United States for a bit, but you guys work too much. And I laughed, and I was like, what do you mean? He's like, well, I went over there and I had to work 3 jobs just to make ends meet. He's like, I come to work, I make enough money to pay the bills. He's like, other than that, I go home, eat, drink tea, spend time with the family, and just have a better quality of life. And I feel like we've really gotten away from that. I have friends that aren't military. Like my military friends, we're like brothers. We're so tight. So we always have those really deep connections, which I think aren't common in the normal world. And I see that a lot in my civilian friends where they don't have those deep, meaningful connections with other people. And I feel like that's really valuable for someone's mental health as well as just security, knowing that you're not alone in this world.
I agree with that. That's some really powerful statements about people that band together, like the Band of Brothers, the World War II series, and then you and your training and your hard tasks, your travel, your meeting up with team members with a goal, a specific deadline to complete the goal. All of these things, you're so dependent on your collaborators, on people in your core group, and maybe even collaborating with people in other groups. You know, the cooking staff. I mean, we all wouldn't last very long without the 2 to 3 meals a day, hydration, you know, nourishment, vitamins and minerals, all these things, and then the time to bond while we're even having the meals. All these things build bonds that are not replaceable when you go out into a competitive business world where someone you're collaborating with may be trying to take your job or ace you out of the company so that they can take over and not have your intelligence hold them down. You know, maybe you're better in some areas and they want you out of there, so they could use any kind of a sabotage or a lie or a rumor just to get you out of there. I'm sure that can happen in the military and does, but when survival is on the line, your life is on the line, I think it would happen less than when you're just being rewarded for a monetary or a business type of productivity and success that might be more fleeting than something in a 2-year or a 30-year military career. Let me know, Jonathan, what your thoughts are on that.
Well, Sifu, I think that speaks to the exact same point again. It's like we're told to value things like money and carnal value, like houses, cars, and those things. And when you're told to value that, like your livelihood is your job, and then a job does come competitive because we live in a capitalist environment where like we get rewarded for having success, and then not a lot of times are we rewarded for ethical or morality. And I feel like if you don't have the moral fiber and that ethical background, then we start making decisions that we don't agree with on a personal or spiritual level. And we may not be able to identify that immediately, but eventually down the road, you're going to realize that it's not aligned. And then you're going to have a lot of work to do to heal that process and try to get it back alignment. So I guess that's basically what I think on that point.
Jonathan, can you tell us what trauma is, where it lives in a human's mind, body, and spirit, and what people do to identify that, and then to take a few first steps in assessing it, becoming aware of it, and then seeking treatment and working through a program?
Hi, this is Sifu Slim, author of The Aging Athlete. In this book, you're going to get to hear about 2 different groups of former high-performance athletes. One group, which is made up of 90% of the former athletes, does not do physical activity on a regular basis and tends to suffer the consequences of a sedentary lifestyle. The other group, which is made up of 10% of the former athletes, is doing physical activity on a regular basis and tends to thrive through the aging process, or at least has a better chance at coping with the aging process. We could have taken these folks to a lab and done all kinds of tests on them. Instead, we slowed them down and sat them down and asked them, in their own words, to describe why they're wired the way they are, so that we all, former athletes and non-athletes, can use some of their inspirational and motivational and mindset lessons in our own lives. I hope you pick up a copy today. You can go to theagingathlete.com. And when you have a chance to read it, I'd love to hear back from you to find out what your thoughts are on the stories of these aging athletes.
Okay, Sifu, that's a big one. First off, I am not a doctor. I'm not a professional. All I have is my life experiences and the conversations that I've had who are doctors and professionals. So, and I'll speak to my experience. I think trauma is simply put, The most traumatic thing that you've experienced in your life is the most traumatic thing that you've experienced, and it's unique to all of us. I think we all have a natural ability to have resiliency, and I think we all have a natural ability to get over things and get through things and endure and persevere. I think that level's different for all of us. So that's why I find mental health so interesting, because there's no cookie cutter, one pill fix all solutions. That's why I think that there's more modalities than I'll ever be able to cover. I think that's why there's more coping skills and mechanisms that I'll ever be able to understand, as well as we talked about the vernacular and talking about changing context. A lot of the modalities that we utilize are historic and ancient, and we rebrand them and put a new name on them. So whoever discovers it gets credit for it, even though it was discovered thousands of years ago, whether it be through prayer, which can be interpreted as meditation, scripture, journaling, all of those things are things that we've done historically in every culture there is in the world. So I think the easiest way to identify trauma is simply, if there's something wrong. We all feel that misalignment. And if you feel that misalignment, if you're having issues with sleep, if you, one of the big ones was I was always told that I was quick to go from 0 to 10. It wasn't until I started meditating that I identified that I was always at a 10. I was just not always able to manage it. So once I identified that I was at a 10, and I did that through learning how to detach from the situation that is, and being able to process and become familiar with that internal dialogue. And then once you become internally curious and inquisitive, you're able to identify at different levels. Like back then, like it was either on or off, I was either triggered or I wasn't. And I never really understood that there was processes that were happening before that. So at a very basic level, just get curious about the internal dialogue. That's going to help you identify what's bothering you, or if anything is bothering you. And then after that, I'd always encourage everybody, like you go to the doctor for an annual physical. I think we should all do the same with psychologists. I think we should integrate that into our daily or yearly routine. Just go in, check in with your mental therapist, mental counselor, and just be like, hey, what's up? These are things that are bothering me. I'm just curious about things. And they're going to give you guidance and direction and how to approach that. Don't approach it like a diet. I feel like people are like, oh, I got to lose weight, so they change up their whole diet and they're not going to eat carbs ever again. And we know that type of lifestyle is not really sustainable. And I feel like the same thing with mental health. Don't go into it thinking you're going to do a short fix. It's not, it's a lifestyle change. So identify some of the coping mechanisms that you may be utilizing. Some of them that I used, a lot of them were really negative, whether it was spending time with women, drinking, substance abuse, avoidance behaviors. It was always to run away from the problem, suppress a problem, make something feel really good so the problem wasn't so glaring. And it wasn't until I started sitting with the problems and processing. And when I say processing, I feel like every issue or traumatic situation that I had, I eventually had to see it in a light that I was able to live with. And once I got to that point, then it was able to process, and it wasn't something that really bothered me anymore. It doesn't mean what happened was good. There's a lot of situations that weren't good, and they never will be. But I can see it from a perspective now, to where it's like, okay, I can live with it, in the sense that it's not going to beat me up and keep me up at night and have those nightmares bouncing back. I think the quickest way to get help, if you're listening and you're curious, I think that's enough indication to let you know that you need help. And the quickest way to do that is get professional help. Reach out, talk to someone. They're going to give you ideas, and that's basically all I think counseling is. It's a cluster of ideas until you find which ideas resonates with you, because your mental health and your process and your situation is going to be unique to yourself. And then after that, you start working through, and there's a million different retreats, places you can go. I always find nature. You mentioned Munich was your place of healing and rejuvenation. And I was like, I feel like Austria. Sorry. Yes.
No problem.
I feel like mine is nature. And, we all find, I have a friend that lives in Texas, and he finds Texas and the desert beautiful. I can't think of anywhere I disagree stronger. I don't like that. I like the woods. I like the trees. I like the water, so that's like where I am. But I think that there's power in nature and power in detaching from those connections of social media, and just spend 5-10 minutes a day alone with yourself and your thoughts. Just give it an opportunity. Just be like, check in, be like, hey, what's up? You know, because I feel like there's not a lot of, before I got my mental health journey, I never did that. I did what you talked about, working so hard. You know, I always had to stay busy. If I wasn't being productive, I was a failure, you know. And I feel like the better version of you that you can be, the better version you can be in every aspect of your life. So once I started giving to myself first, then I became a better brother, a better friend, a better son, you know, and then I was able to give more back to these people. And I think the biggest life lesson that I learned through this whole process, I did it initially because I wanted to help. You know, I think I'm part of an EOD community, and we lost more EOD techs to suicide than we did in the war. So that told me that there was a real need, and I wanted to help these people, you know, and the realization that you can't help anyone. You know, I feel like you can only really help yourself. And the best way to help others is be an example of what you envision a good person is. And then if you're good enough, that's going to resonate with other people, and they're going to become curious and ask you, like, what are you doing?
What did you say? Uity, Jonathan?
What's that?
What was the group? You said a Uity group?
EOD, explosive ordnance
Oh,
disposal.
okay. EOD.
Yes.
Tell me if these two sentences make sense in the way you think of the story of trauma and PTSD. You can't control the fact that there was trauma. You can work on your response to it.
I think that that's the traditional approach. Yeah, I think that there's a huge piece that's being missed, and I hope to change it. I think that there is a process of preparing for trauma, because it's not if you're going to experience trauma, it's when you're going to experience trauma. We all will. It doesn't matter like who you are. There's a different variation of like how much trauma you can experience, because I think there's a study from Canada that came out that showed the average civilian is going to experience anywhere between 3 to 5 traumatic situations in their life, whereas like, you know, a first responder or military potentially could experience 1,000. But as you know, you're a world traveler, it depends on where you're at. There's a lot of places that experience a higher rate of trauma than I would say us in Western culture. So but still it boils down to there's preventative things that we can do to increase our resiliency, as well as learning positive coping mechanisms before we experience trauma. So I would add that. But yeah, then once you experience trauma, then it's processing and dealing with that trauma. That's the next key.
You mentioned prepare, and prevention's part of prepare. So a wise pastor told me maybe 15 years ago, he said, we're always in a state of prepare or repair.
Repair. Yeah.
You've heard that one.
I have. I like that quote and phrase.
Do you know where it comes from?
I don't. I'm sure I have it in my notes. I have a notes of all my favorite quotes, but it's
What?
about 1,000 deep.
Yeah. Watch us find somebody in the 1960s who wrote a book using that. Everybody attributes that quote to that writer, and then we'll find it in the ancient Stoics, you know, in Greek,
Right.
saying the same
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah, exactly.
So I write a lot about the connection between mind, body, and spirit, and I'll also throw in ancestry, karma, other lives if people want to throw them in. I'm open to all these things, and a lot of people who've written really incredible things on all of those subjects. So I don't want anyone to discount any of those. Just keep an open mind and hear people out. I think it's fun to just hear conversations about those things, whether you currently believe they are not accurate or what you believe. So when I think about people who are sedentary, and that was my first book on wellness, it was called Sedentary Nation. When I think about the fact that that's the big change between my grandfather's generation, he was born in 1903 or 1898, somewhere, yeah, 1898, my grandmother was 1903. So they were born there and they moved all the time. Even if they were in suburbia or urban areas, they moved all the time. Sack of potatoes over the shoulder, up 5 flights of stairs if you lived in New York City or Newark, New Jersey. You're walking. My great-grandfather on my father's side was born in Germany, and he used to walk to work more than a mile or so in the Newark, New Jersey, to save, I think it was a nickel on the trolley car. So these are the things people did, and they moved all the time. So if you're moving all the time, of course, your heart rate's doing its thing, your breath is doing its thing, you're seeing different things, people are passing by you. My great grandfather's time, horses were in the streets. So you're just seeing a lot of activity, rather than if you're like a stay-at-home person, or you're working in an office where you go there in the morning and you're stuck until lunchtime or maybe all day, like at the Googleplex in the south of Palo Alto. Trying to blank on that one town where they are, the Googleplex. They could be there 16 hours a day because they've got the fitness center, they've got the chiropractics, they've got a multitude of restaurants. So not a lot of big changes will happen in terms of their mobility and seeing different things. It's seeing the same things all the time and getting their work done and interacting with their fellow colleagues. So those are the things in the modern era. And I say that if you compare that to a hunter-gatherer or a farmer or an industrialist like my ancestors that were in America in the late 1800s, you find that trauma could be dealt with, harsh work conditions, so a child dying, two children dying, a boss firing you, a boss lying about you, a colleague lying about you, whatever trauma, a friend of yours falling in front of the tracks and getting run over by a trolley car, whatever the trauma is that you saw, when you're moving and you're physically changing your space, seeing different things, trauma becomes so much easier to handle. And then if you go back to the hunting and gathering people, you're running after an animal with a spear, you're falling, you're carrying an animal, and along the way, another predator comes by and attacks you for that animal. So you get mauled on your leg or wherever you get mauled, and you lost your food. So there's this trauma. But in the meantime, you have to huff and puff to get back to your campsite, or you have to go out and catch another animal by huffing and puffing. So all of these ancient ways, or not too ancient, pre the last 2 or 3 generations of living, you had a way to expel breath, expel energy, change your visual horizon, go up and down trails, go up and down stairs, and you're not this couch potato, desk potato, office potato, car potato, where you're just expanding normally in volume of your fat cells, becoming more obese and more toxic, and then having a traumatic experience hitting this weakened human state where we're living in our head already because we're not using our body. So we're living in our heads, we're living in our mind, we have a busy mind, and then we get this apathy cascade where we're repeating the same thing over and over. And now a traumatic event happens. Somebody gets cancer, you get cancer, whatever the traumatic event is, your son comes home from the war, missing 2 limbs, whatever it is. And so now you have to deal with it, and you're not huffing and puffing, you're not out in nature, you're in drywall, and you're in stress 24 hours a day in this digital world. I think it's normal to have almost unfathomable and unsolvable PTSD in the modern era when you're trying to do things by changing the mind and not changing the body, and not allowing that to throw the endorphins and throw the hormones and the other things I'm trying to think of that I'm drawing a blank on. The other things that affect our brain, the mechanisms that affect our brain, like drugs do. What are endorphins called? Is that a hormone? I think that might be a hormone.
Yeah, endorphins, and then like alcohol reduces the cortisol in your brain. It makes you less anxious. There's a lot going on there, like serotonin. It's going to make you happier.
Happy.
Things like,
yep.
Yeah, there's a lot to touch on what you just discussed. I feel like we'll start with I guess the easiest one that I'm thinking of is we don't live in the tough times that we used to. I feel like our society is so comfortable. It's comfortable,
Complacent's
and
another word too.
yeah. I mean, I feel like when you talk about back in the day when hunter gatherers and things of that nature, like they lived life and death daily. Like if you failed, you died. There's a lot on the risk. I don't feel like we really do that in Western culture. We can do anything we want. I can go to the grocery store and get sausage from Italy, cheese from France, crackers from Oregon, and just like feel like a little bougie boy, and like just eat this and get me some beautiful wine from Hawaii or the
Yeah.
Napa Valley. It's like I can have anything I want, anytime I want. And I feel like by having that, we don't have challenges. And by not having challenges, we do things like doom scrolling. We look for conflict, whether it be on social media. We look for conflict in our, I don't know, in our politics, or even though there's plenty of conflict there, whether you look for it or not. It's just like, I feel like if we don't have that challenge, then we find it, or we go find those challenges, because I feel like if we need struggle, because everything in life, whether it be our immune system or anything, if it's not challenged or struggled, it becomes weak. And I feel like that happens with our mental health. And then you spoke about physical fitness and physically moving. I feel like we oftentimes separate mental and physical, whether it be physical health, you go to the doctor, mental health, that's some woo-woo. But I feel like they're so integrated, and physical health has been shown in so many studies. Like Dr. Carlton did a study for the Royal Police up there in Canada, and it showed that whoever is doing more physical fitness is less likely for mental health challenges than those who do not. Or you can look into Susie Landeroff. She talks about lifting heavy shit. Sorry if I'm not allowed to swear, but if you lift heavy things, then it makes life seem easier. Like if you're doing something you're not going to enjoy, but it has a positive impact, then it's going to be rewarding. So I feel like that's another aspect, and we're so couch potato-y that it's hard to get over that comfort. We don't like being in discomfort. And then another thing, I was in Ukraine. You were talking about how, like, even back in the day, carrying the potatoes up all those stairs. Back in the day, like in Ukraine, I saw 80, 90-year-old ladies walking to and from the grocery store with just handfuls of groceries, like bodybuilders carrying dumbbells, walking on an inch of ice back and forth from their apartment complex. And it's like, we don't have to do that here. I don't know anywhere in the world that does that. You could have groceries delivered to your house here. And then another one that you mentioned earlier was generational trauma. I think that in, like, multiple lives and things of that nature, I feel like I'm at the level that I'm at with mental health and my journey with mental health. That's an area I find really interesting and curious, especially like the pre-lives process. Like I find that fun. It's a fun topic to talk about and listen to. Generational trauma, on the other hand, I think that's something that's more defined and easier to palette, initially, because you can see it, generations of Ukrainians. And I don't want to keep saying Ukrainians, Russians, because I feel like that's a hot topic. I'm just saying people who have endured suffrage over hundreds of years, to the point where, I don't know, coffee shops, Pizza Hut, pizza places, and bars are located in bunkers, like they're prepared for war. And it's so prepared for war that you can see it everywhere in their culture. Like cultures like that, like I feel like that there's a level of generational trauma that often gets overlooked. And I feel like that's it's something that we could address better too.
So I'm just looking up oxytocin. It's a peptide hormone and a neuropeptide normally produced in the hypothalamus and released by the posterior pituitary. So that's this bonding hormone that females have a lot of and males have a lot less of. So when there's an intimate situation, the female will naturally bond. And they ask, why do women date jerks? That's been a big topic on the blogosphere and the media over the last 20 to 40 years, and talk shows on TV like Mike Douglas back in the 70s and the 80s. Before that, part of it's endorphins, and part of it is women seem, I'm not going to say all women or anything else on this, but they seem in general to like to solve problems and have things that are challenging that they have to solve, which would mean finding someone who is a deficient in being a well-rounded, kindly human, aka a jerk, and saying, well, I can transform that person. Or maybe they like the fact that that person mistreats them. It fires something in their brain. Nothing to do with our conversation, but I thought I'd throw that in there because it's been something that's been confusing and confounding me. Kind of a nice person, John Boy Wilton, caring, empathetic, healing type person, and watching women, be nice to me at other times and then treat me like I were a jerk when I'm not the person that I would consider a jerk. Over to you for your thoughts on some of those things related to oxytocin.
I enjoyed how you piggyback off the generational trauma, because I feel like that is something that I've seen a lot of in my community, both men and women. Toxic relationships. We're taught how to be in relationships by our parents and their parents before them, and it's taught downward. So I feel like a lot of us may become, not a lot of us, I know that me and some of my friends, we came from environments where the dynamics of the relationship might have been tense, but we thought that was normal. So then we adventure off into this world looking for that drama, that intense relationship, which we associate with love. And that's why a lot of times we get into toxic relationships, and then we get addicted to that really intense fighting, and then that huge loving, because I feel like that gets our adrenaline up. A lot of us in my career field, we like adrenaline, like being close to the fire, and then oxytocin. The only thing I'd really speak about on that is I just had a conversation with a doctor regarding MDMA assisted therapy and how successful it's shown to be due to a lot of the oxytocin being released in the brain. You just get overwhelmed with like positivity and happiness. And it's really hard to look at a traumatic situation in a therapeutic setting when you're just flooded with love and happiness. So I felt like that was a really cool approach to, I guess, therapy and dealing with trauma if you're struggling with that. But currently it's not legal everywhere, but hopefully one day it will be.
So the happy hormone, I'm looking that up, see what they say here. Happy hormones. So they put oxytocin in the list, dopamine, serotonin, and endorphins. Yeah. So they put all these four under the happy hormones. I will share this. I interviewed Ken Shamrock, really nice guy, highly intelligent, MMA fighter in the early days of the MMA, had a long career, natural athlete, and a friendly guy. And now he's on a speaking tour. He's been in documentaries, and he's very fun to listen to. So when I was interviewing him back in Reno, Nevada, in person in 2013, he had just come out of quite a few years of heavy physical training, heavy trauma, had a lot of different parts, metal parts, brackets in his back, rebuilt knees, titanium in his neck, just like a bionic man, and he was still going strong. He told me that he went through a period, I can't remember if it was depression or pain-related depression, but some issues, and the doctor gave him something to boost his dopamine or serotonin. I think it was serotonin, but I can't remember. And he said it was a false sense of happiness. It did make you feel better temporarily, but you have to come off of that at some point. And of course, most of these drugs have shortened lifespans in terms of their potentiality to affect you in the way that you like to have them affect you. It's like many drugs, they lose their potency. And I know people talk about heroin and cocaine, like the second time you're doing it and the third time, the rest of your times doing those two particular drugs, you're trying to recreate the first time you did it. And it's because that fired your biochemistry, your neurology, like you've never felt anything before, and you want to recreate it, but your body's, your mind's own, your neurology's own system shuts that down and says that we're not going to make it easy. And people try to use more, they try to combine drugs, they do whatever they can, they try to get that first high, but it never happens. It's an impossibility. As far as I know, that was the last I had heard on those drugs' effect and people seeking the effects of those first-time uses. Over to you, Jonathan, for your thoughts.
Absolutely, Sifu. I think just my personal opinion, using drugs for the getting high effect is not healthy. That's a very, I guess, dramatic approach of a behavior avoidance practice. I do think that there is benefits for certain drugs like MDMA, psilocybin, ayahuasca, things of that nature for a therapeutic setting, with someone who's and the intent is to get a new perspective. A lot of these medications can change how your brain works. A lot of them remove, basically it makes, I'd have to refresh, but it makes the other part of the brain's work, whereas the ego aspect of the brain reduces. So you're able to see and process things a little bit differently. And I'm not saying it's a one shop fix all, because I don't think mental health is, but I definitely think it's another tool in the toolbox for someone who has tried all the other modalities and they haven't worked, and they want to try something a little bit more interesting or experimental, as well as sometimes they always refer to MDMA as like really fun. I've never been to therapy and thought, man, that was fun. But if they can bring fun into therapy, then I'm all about it. But that's just my thoughts on that. And what else do we talk? Oh, and it allows you to open a door. I feel like some of us, some people may only have like one or two traumas or 5 or 6 traumas, like those individually aren't too overwhelming, but some of us that have, hundreds of traumas, like it's not so much dealing. I've not, like me personally, I can't deal with one trauma. I feel like I open the door of trauma. And if I walk in there, they're all interconnected. So there's no processing individual one of them. But I feel like using these sort of modalities, I'm able to open that door and not let it be so overwhelming.
Jonathan, do you remember in your training and in your first deployment what the people that were your supervisors or the consultants they had come in or the psychotherapists they had come in told you about how you've been bonding with people in your core group? The Marines, it's the platoon, and the Army, it's, what is it in the Army? Your group of people, your unit, whatever they call it.
I don't know. I was Air Force, so ours was a flight squadron and then a group. So Army would have been platoon.
So your small unit, you're bonding with these people, and do they warn you about the fact that you could lose one of your very close contacts and how to handle that? Did they help you with the I don't know if that's called prevention or just awareness of the reality of combat and of accidents and of sabotage and other things that could wind up maiming someone, having them lose their mind or ending their life?
No, that's the easiest answer ever, Sifu. I didn't have any there's no like mental health training. There was nothing. I think we had at the end when we came back from the deployment, it was a very brief, and I would say almost it felt like they were coddling us, in a sense. It was a very large group of people, and we were the only ones in that group who actually experienced combat. The rest of them were on a base that had some IDF occasionally, which in its own right is traumatizing if that's your most traumatic situation. But we didn't have any pre-training, the post-training, the post-processing, the post-evaluations. They were all really weak. I think that they have improved since then, but I still think there's a lot of room to improve for that still, even in the first responders aspect and what we're experiencing stateside for like police officers, nurses, things of that nature. Like I don't feel like it's an easy path to get help.
Jonathan, can you share your thoughts on uncontrollable impulses and your reactions to those, and how you've learned to, for yourself and to maybe coach other people, how to handle those two things, uncontrollable impulses and reactions?
Yeah, absolutely, Sifu. I think that I would define that as unconscious. That we have patterns of behavior, whether it be conscious or unconscious patterns of behavior, and an impulse would be suggestive of you aren't aware of it coming. And I think the best way to do that is to identify, like, if you have negative things in your life, and it seems to be a pattern, like relationships not working out, or you're not as productive at work and you feel like you should be, you're not doing the things that you say you can, most likely there's an unconscious pattern of behavior that's the result. So for me, I'll just use an easy one. I wasn't physically as fit as I like to be. I wasn't as healthy as I wanted to be. And I'm like, why is this? And it's like, oh, well, I didn't want to work out. I haven't worked out. And it's like, well, okay, well, why didn't I work out? And it's like, I like working out in the mornings opposed to the evenings. In the evenings, I'm tired. I don't have the motivation. I don't have the energy. I don't have the discipline. So it's like, well, why don't I work out in the mornings? And it's like, well, I don't work out in the mornings because I'm hungover. It's like, well, why was I hungover? And I was like, because I wanted to go out and drink. So it was like, oh, so I am dealing with, or you can go further, like, why was I going out to drink? It was because I was stressed. Why was I stressed? Is because I don't have a healthy outlet. Why don't I have a healthy outlet? Well, I do, working out. Well, why aren't I working out? So that's the loop. That was the loop I was stuck in. And it all resulted with a negative coping mechanism, which was I resulted to alcohol before a healthy outlet, which had negative impacts. It just, I wasn't aware of it at the time. So that's how I would process it. Start at the end. If you have a result you don't like, walk it back, be honest with yourself. That's something that we all struggle with. I feel like we want to tell ourselves that everything's fine, that we're fine, that there's no problem, that we're perfect. We're not perfect. And the more honest and real with yourself you can be, the faster you will heal, and the faster you'll get to a place where you don't have to pretend to be something that you're not. You can actually be that variation. And honestly, like, I'm at a level now that I'm way better than I thought I could ever been. I'm at a level that I never pretended to be this good, and it's like, it's really exciting to be able to get to that place and it be real.
So when you mention the alcohol and the sleep and the dysfunction, it reminds me of one of the most functional alcoholics I've ever heard of. And this is Dennis Rodman, NBA, probably all-time rebounding champion. Heavy focus on this guy. So I thought in the 70s, 80s, 90s that some of these athletes were just natural talents that had ability. Michael Jordan, Dennis Rodman, Tiger Woods now, and later on than the people I mentioned, and then Roger Federer at the same time as Tiger Woods. I thought some of these people were just gifted athletes who could outperform everyone. And the more I've written 2 books on athletes now, high performance athletes, and I've interviewed about 3,000 athletes over the last 15 years. So what I've found is that the best athletes out there are typically the ones that definitely had a gift, definitely had drive, but they were the hardest workers. My Austrian tennis camp that I was in a few weeks ago, the head instructor is a German guy. I'm 61. He's about 65. We were talking about, and he played on the circuit, and we were talking about Roger Federer. We were talking about Boris Becker, who was in the generation before Roger Federer, a German guy, big, strong athlete from Germany. And he's had some big problems himself. I can't remember if they're substance abuse or just being silly with his money. But Roger Federer, he said, this gifted athlete, probably the most beautiful of the top 10 players in the history of known tennis, like, where the motion of the camera is not compromised by, being shot back in the 1920s or 30s. So you see this person, you say, this guy's like a ballet star, and the perfect striking zone, the perfect hand-eye coordination, the perfect movement, the perfect focus, the perfect disposition, doesn't get too hot in his personality or too cold. He's just always there, whether it's 2 hours or 4 hours. And he told me, he said, how many hours a day Roger Federer practiced for 15 years or more to be that top 4 player that he was? I said, no, I thought he was a natural. He practiced a little bit, did his physical training, physical therapy, and went out and just had these beautiful, beautiful strokes. He said, no. He said there were most times he was practicing 7 hours a day to get that. I'm thinking, yeah. Oh my gosh. Then I remembered watching Dennis Rodman, who watched films of all of his opponents for a day or two before those night games. He'd watch hours of the people he had to go against. He memorized all of their patterns. So he knew how to box them out, how to get the rebounds, how to handle them. And then he would go out and drink, like if he was in Tahoe or Reno or somewhere where there's 24-hour casinos, he'd be drinking until 2 in the morning, and then he'd go back in, and his physical trainer would meet him there, and they'd do an hour and a half of weightlifting while he was drunk. You know, not me drunk, but him drunk, which he could handle it better than I could. I couldn't lift weights for an hour and a half, do a good job if I had, 6 belts of hard liquor, but he had 4 hours in him, right? He goes back and he drinks for, he lifts weights, and then he goes to sleep at 4 or 5 in the morning, and then he gets up, goes to his team meetings at 10 or 12 or whenever they are, and then he comes out at 6 in the night, puts on a performance, and he's, the top 3 players on the court. So this is like the most functional alcoholic I've ever heard of, and that worked for him. I shouldn't say worked. It didn't make him thrive, in my opinion, as a human, but it certainly made him the highly productive NBA star who had to travel all the time and deal with all the pressures he did. That's the most incredible drinking story I've ever heard of. You ever heard of anything like that?
No, I've never heard one being that successful. I've heard of, I don't know, it sounds bad, but I know of a story of a police officer that he did drugs for years, and it ended up his heart exploded and had a heart attack and died. And that was the result of that. But no one noticed, and he was one of the best police officers anyone had ever seen. He was highly functional. I feel like it plays a role in the mental health of it's detaching the mind from some sort of emotion. I feel like in that aspect, or some sort of drive, because I feel like to be that level of successful, you've got to have some overwhelming motivation, whether it be positive or negative internally, to push you that far. Something else that reminded me of is I feel like you're talking about the 1% of the 1% of people, that group of people, and I feel like if we're all honest with ourselves, there's zero chance that I'm going to be one of the 1% of the 1%. But I feel like to be part of the 1% of individuals, it's not that difficult. I feel like there's a lot of people that say they're trying and they're doing things, but honestly, a lot of people are just saying that. I feel like a lot of us could be like the best versions of people that we could imagine. And it just takes a little bit of effort. And to get that effort is discipline. It doesn't mean always doing it the hardest way. Like for me, like I can work out in the evenings and like later in the evenings. I don't like to. So I don't like wait till then. So I don't have to rely on the most discipline I have to conjure. I try to set myself up for success, get a healthy routine, do positive coping mechanisms, and eventually you can get to that top 1%, and you could be so proud of yourself,
Do you have any interest in going through steps that we found in other people or in our own life that have helped us with our mental wellness and our connection of mind, body, and spirit? Like you'll name one, and then I'll name one. We'll go back and forth maybe 5 to 8 times and see what we can get out of that. Maybe give the people watching this a rapid fire list of things that they can jot down and attempt to consider for their own wellness.
Yes. My first one jumps to mind is being uncomfortable with discomfort. That was a lesson that took me about 3 to 4 years to process. It was something that an individual told me, and he's like, you just got to learn to be comfortable with discomfort. And because I was at the point then, every time I was uncomfortable, I would just get so irritable and so fired up. And it didn't really connect until I was in, I guess, Ukraine. And there was items going off all around us. And there's still people like kids playing outside. And I was like, if they could be comfortable in this environment to the point where it's not infecting them, I'm like, why am I uncomfortable about a boss that may or may not like me at work, So it was like, it really gave me a different perspective. So that would be my first one.
What was going off? Missiles or bombs?
Yeah, there was missiles as well as drones.
Wow, God, I've never been around an offensive drone or like a spy drone that I know of. I mean, they're drones the size of wasps now. But as far as I know, I've never had anything that was spying on me or something that was coming after me to kill me. And you have had both of those, I imagine.
Yes.
When was the first year that stepped into your life? Within the last 10 years?
No, I was 20. I was 20 years old.
Oh,
So I'd say it was a couple decades ago. It was the first time I experienced life and death to that level,
wow.
which honestly, it took me a long time. It wasn't until I went over again to Ukraine that I don't know. I've been in pursuit of happiness for a long time. And it wasn't until I guess that environment that I realized that happiness isn't real in the sense of it's not a state of mind that I can live in. I feel like happiness has only really shown itself to me when I have a shock, a shockingly positive situation. So those are rare, and you can't be shocked if you're prepared for it. So I feel like I can't ever live in happiness. What I can live in is peace. So I am currently on a deeper investigation on what peace means to me. But at that moment in Ukraine, in that environment, I felt the closest to peace that I've ever felt, even though it was in the most chaotic situation that you can imagine. So I've really spent a lot of time thinking that through. And for me individually, like the reason I think I connected to that because everyone in that moment was real. Like we went out to dinner afterwards and everybody was talking about real things. There's no cell phones, no social media. People were connected and present in the moment. And I felt that that was really beautiful, as well as I think we all spend so much time in fear and avoiding death, avoiding discomfort, avoiding danger. Like we spend so much time doing that. I think the closer you get to just living life, the more peace that you get. And then you're not avoiding anything. If it happens, it happens. Like I'd rather live my life to the fullest and get as close to that razor's edge as possible than spend my whole life avoiding it. And then you get to a point where you're like, oh, life's over.
So over to my point, Jonathan, I'm going to work on your point, and try to factor that into to my life, the discomfort, and being okay. What was the word you used? Being comfortable in the discomfort?
Yeah, be comfortable with discomfort.
Be comfortable with discomfort. So my point would be a biological point, and I'll throw two things in there. The two most common wellness concerns for workers, for homebodies, for athletes, for anyone: low vitamin D and low hydration. So hydration for me is easy because that's what I drink all day long, water. So here's a kombucha bottle, and I drink out of glass because ceramic and glass are the only two things that don't leach. Even stainless steel has nickel in it, which of course leaches after a while, but still better than plastic. So I don't trust any plastics despite what the bottles say. I do use plastic because you can't take glass everywhere. Like my martial arts studios, they want you to have stainless steel or plastic. So on my bike trips, I might have a plastic bottle, but those are minimal. 98% of the time I'm drinking out of glass, maybe more. So people should have that in their car, their desk area, or their work area, their sports area, their sleeping area. Have water next to you and be drinking that all the time. And there's no need for all these other concoctions. If you want flavor, you can do tea. There's so many different types of tea that you can do, and try to get organic and healthful tea. And then on the vitamin D, the people in Scandinavia have known this for ages. I don't know why the Canadians and the Americans, I grew up in New Jersey, we weren't popping vitamin D in the 60s and 70s when I was a kid. And I don't think the Canadians were either. The Scandinavians were. Why did they know that and we didn't? Because they were more connected to wellness. They're more connected to their ancestors than we were. And they knew that in the wintertime, you had to have a solution for the lack of sun. And even if you're out skiing, if the sun's not close enough to the earth, you're not getting enough the rays of the sun on enough surface area of your skin to produce the vitamin D. So that's a big piece of mental health, a big piece in wellness, And so you got to have those two things. Over to Jonathan, if he has any points of view on my points of view, or if he wants to share a next one, either way.
I think Sifu, I agree with that. Supplementing and making sure your levels are where they need to be is very important because it's so interconnected. I went to a doctor and we had blood drawn, and he's like, "Your testosterone's low," and I was like, "I'm getting older." I was like, "That's the process," and he's like, "No," he's like, "You're not eating iron," and I was like, "What?" And he's like, "You need to eat more iron." I ate more iron, testosterone levels went up.
Wow.
So it's like, oh wow, like our bodies are so it's a
Sen-
system, and we
we're
have to keep it
sensitive.
in check. Yeah. And if we let it get out of whack by eating a whole bunch of processed food and like complex sugars and all of this stuff, like we start having physical problems. I think physical problems is our body saying, like, hey, you need to fix this. Like we're like right now it's a problem. It's getting ready to be catastrophic.
Iron, fantastic. I just got done with a little over a month in Kitzbühel, Austria, and they have a lake called the Black Lake, the Schwarzsee, and it's got bogs around it, so it has sulfur and it has a lot of iron. You can't see more than 8 inches into the water. So if there was a Loch Ness monster, he could be having a good old time in there. So I'm swimming in there every day, and you're absorbing that iron, and so that's really good stuff for women who have their cycle and lose iron. We all need iron, except for the people who have hemochromatosis, which is you
Yeah.
don't have the ability to excrete or process the iron, so you become overloaded with iron. And Hemingway and his father, his kids, his siblings, many of them had hemochromatosis, and they all went bonkers, not just because of the hemochromatosis, but that certainly is part of it, leading you on the path towards mental breakdown. Over to Jonathan for his next thought.
I agree. I like that. Sifu. So the next one is going to be, it sounds cheesy, but it's something I always enjoyed and I did it for years. And it was just something when things get dark, it was to help me remap my brain and remap my processes. And it was positive in, positive out. So it was to help me stop drinking because drinking wasn't positive. It was toxic relationships in my life, whether it be spouses or friends. It was cutting those out, because I feel like we have choices a lot of times that, we pretend that aren't our choice, and we get to the point where we have so much negative coming in to our lives. It's really hard to stay positive and be positive. So that was a really big one on my list, as well as knowing what you can change. Like, I think it's an old prayer. My neighbor used to have it like in their bathroom, and I would sit there and I'd read it, and it was like, I'm paraphrasing, but God grant me the wisdom to change the things that I have control over, and peace with the things that I can't control, or something along those lines,
Yep.
And I felt like that's really impactful. We have a lot more control over things than we give ourselves credit for. And I feel like that really helped my life in the right direction when I was just really honest with myself and being like, you do have control of these things, take ownership of it and get after it, as well as like, you're not getting any smarter. This is your limits. Like, so that was for me, like, yeah, I'm not going to be Elon Musk. I'm going to be Jonathan Sheridan. This is where I'm going to live. And this is the level I'm at. And if this is the path, like just being real with yourself. I think that's the best part.
The serenity prayer.
Yes, that's it.
God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and wisdom to know the difference. And then it goes on from there, living one day at a time. So that's
Yep.
I'll switch back to my talk on Hawaii. The courage to change the things I can. And I'm not I'm a writer and I'm a podcast host. I'm a coach. So I want to identify those things. I can't solve Hawaii's problem, but I can identify some things, and I can, use sarcasm and humor and harsh criticism if need be to point things out that are unfair and are dark. The Darth Vader lifestyle of control and choking everybody through his power. What is that called? Telepathy. telepathic powers, that wasn't good. But then when he finally takes off his mask and there he is, you can see he's a human being, and he's reconnecting with his son Luke after all these years. You can see that he's got sorrow, and he's asking for forgiveness, redemption, all these things. That's a good message, and I think Hawaii needs to go through, a lot of places in this world, families, whatever, they need to go through that process where they can admit the things that they've done wrong and work on solutions and work on love and togetherness and kindness and acceptance and all these wonderful things that Serenity Prayer talks about. So that would be my next point, is identify, bring up positive changes and work on those programs to change them, all with love and kindness and openness. Over to Jonathan.
Absolutely, Sifu. And I think that you can take that same approach with ourselves, positivity, being compassionate with ourselves. We're not always going to be successful, and when we stumble and make mistakes, being compassionate enough to forgive ourselves and be like, it's all right. We can get better. We're going to get better, move forward. And then my next point would be, you spoke on it briefly, martial arts. I started doing jiu-jitsu about 3 years ago, almost 4 now. And I feel like that was such a huge positive impact on my mental health. It's almost like a moving meditation. I like exercise, I like meditation, and I like being challenged. And I feel like all 3 of them come together in that environment, as well as I can get a little aggression out. That's the whole point. We can be a little bit aggressive in that environment, and it's okay, because that's what everybody's there for, as long as you stay within the parameters of the art. But yeah, that was another really big positive impact in my life.
So I've been into Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu since '97. I had seen the UFC Royce Gracie fights before then, and I had done wrestling, and I had done a number of different martial arts in my life. Always enjoyed it, and I thought that was a good sport for my body, because I could go pretty hard in Jiu-Jitsu, and it wasn't like the linebackers in football had this running start and could plant me into the frozen tundra in November and December in New Jersey, like was common. And we did the tackle games without any pads on. Believe me being a thin Michael Jackson built guy, I was really feeling that stuff, and I still loved it, but it wasn't a good sport for my body type. Luckily, I did it at a young age, and not much later in terms of the tackle game, in my 20s, when I started to be a little bit older and slowed down on the recovery. But there's a guy named Eddie Bravo, who's the master of the rubber guard and of the modern movement of flexibility in jiu-jitsu, and he's a very interesting guy. And when they were talking on the Rogan show and some other shows I've heard him on, he talked about why these young techies and computer game kids, people like who work at Google, these people were sedentary and on computers, and they're very intelligent in some areas, why they're coming to jiu-jitsu. And it's different from why guys my age, when I got into jiu-jitsu in my 30s, were going to jiu-jitsu. These young guys, let me ask you, Jonathan, if you can guess why this younger, last 20 year, like your age, generation of people, these kids are techie. I don't know if you're a techie and a gamer, but why you think your generation and a little bit next generation are, according to Eddie, coming to jiu-jitsu?
Sifu, I think that's a fun connection. I was actually just thinking about this and reading into it just I guess the last few weeks. I think it has a lot to do with flow state, and it's more of a spiritual context if you get into it. Like man, I'm gonna have to pull up my notes, but basically what it is, every video game that's been created is to keep us in flow, is to keep us in the present moment, where basically your skill set is reflective of the challenge in front of you, and it's like a perfect little balance. It's not too anxious, not too easy, and I feel like every video game is designed to do that. Jiu-jitsu and some martial arts also have that exact same aspect to them. They just implement a physical aspect to it also. I was going to mention also what led to my jiu-jitsu and landing on jiu-jitsu was a study I read from Israel about attention training. And I was like, well, what is attention training? You know, and it could be a lot of variations of things, but I like doing physical activity. So I was like, oh, so like boxing. I was like, I don't want to get punched in the head. I already have traumatic brain injury. I was like, so we'll skip that one. So I landed on jiu-jitsu, and I think that that's why it's so helpful with mental health, because it helps you learn to detach. It helps you learn to be calm in challenging situations. So all of these lessons that I learned in that environment, I then applied to like my normal life. So if I go to the grocery store and I have an elevated heart rate because I'm triggered from whatever reason, because historically what I did is I did avoidance behavior. I didn't want to be triggered, so I never went into an environment to be triggered. So which that just made me more sensitive to being triggered. So I went the other route, and I went extremely hard into being triggered in challenging situations. And then that's what led to jiu-jitsu, which led to me teaching and remapping my brain to how process to get out of those environments. So that was like a two-part answer, my own personal experience as well as why I think it's because we're drawn to that flow state and that feeling of being in that flow state. It's so personally rewarding, and we get that in video games, and I think you get it in martial arts too.
Yeah, I think you nailed a lot of the points that Eddie Bravo and a lot of these instructors talk about with this younger generation, the people who were between like age 20 or 15 even and 45. They're different in terms of their athletic backgrounds. Where when I was a kid, we played multiple sports, and we're constantly getting into our friends' sports. So if we played football and they did soccer, we'd go kick the soccer ball around with them, and then we'd throw football with them. And then we're gearing up for all the next sport. The wrestlers, they taught us some moves, so we were practicing those out on the grass or out in the snow, just always doing sports, and we couldn't get enough of it. But when you have video games, you have the internet, you have endless supply of Netflix and cable channels, and just endless supply of entertainment, the ability to create your own videos, your time and your energy and a lot of your intellect will go into different areas than the simpler 1960s through 80s when I was in my kid through college years, where we could not get enough of sport. I mean, I got a new tennis racket. That was the coolest thing since sliced bread. This is so cool. I'm showing all of my friends my tennis racket. You know, I don't see people in the last 20 years getting excited about their new racket, because all these young people who are into tennis, they have so many. And if they're really good, they had sponsors who were giving them rackets, right? It's no big deal. But for me, you know, the waiting for the new set of golf clubs and saving up the money for the whopping $180, like in 1978, it cost me for a set of irons, which was a lot of money back then. But now it's, you know, $2,500 is a pretty good pop just for a set of irons that are fitted to you with the right shaft length, the right grip size, the right weighted head. The whole thing's dialed in by a club fitter who's got this computer, you know, and knowledge base. So it's a completely different world we have now in terms of what's important to people. And I think you mentioned the things that were important to these people. If you're on a video game, if you are a techie and you're used to finding things that are solutions on the internet with your programs, with your apps, Jiu-Jitsu is the perfect chess game, technical application, instant gratification that that mirrors a lot of those patterns you've been doing since you were 5 years old on your iPhone and on your computer games. Over to you, Jonathan.
Absolutely, Sifu. And I think you know, you think about the challenge, effort, and reward. They both have all of that, you know. So when you think about a video game, if it gets too challenging, you lose the level or you die in the video game, and then you restart, which if you think about it, it's just training. So you're training to be successful. So in jiu-jitsu, like if you get in an environment where you're not going to win, you tap, you lose, you learn more skills, more skill sets, and then you go back at it. When you are winning, you get the tap, you feel that reward, and when you get that enough, you level up. Same as in a video game, you level up, you know. So I feel like there's a lot of similarities to that for sure.
Fantastic. So we've done a nice cross section of getting to know each other's basic, some of our basic core values, and a little bit of our history. some things about biochemistry, some things about psychology, a little bit about travel. I'm going to share with you my background here. So this is Waikiki, and this is a sunset in 2017 down the road from where I lived, where people go to a hotel restaurant on, like a cliff, and they watch the sunset. And it's a really beautiful place to watch the sunset. And a lot of people there are travelers from, all over the world that are in a hotel for 4 days or 8 days on Oahu, and they get to see this beautiful sunset, which is, almost every day you can see that sunset. So it's a fabulous place. So the sun, like trauma, has a lot of power, and it has things to learn from it. Of course, we don't want to look at the sun. We can see parts of the sunset, but we certainly don't want to watch it when it's at full power. We can look at different angles. We can, of course, wear the goggles like they have when you're doing welding and other protective measures. But the sun, it's almost like a traumatic event. There's the end of the day, and there goes the sun. And then tomorrow, it's a traumatic event for people who are sleeping and don't have, like, I wear a beanie, a sleeping fleece beanie over my eyes. So if the sun comes up or a light goes on or any other light, ambient light, it doesn't hit me because I'm in complete darkness. But for many people, the sun is a traumatic event. People that don't like their jobs or have a tough commute or have a long day, that signals to them that they have to get up. They've got to get to their kids going. They've got to get dressed and showered and shaved and do their exercises or whatever. And then they have to go face the day, which, if you're a high school teacher like I've been before, which is a big challenge at times, or other parts of teaching, or if you're in the military and you say we're moving out at 5 a.m. and sunrise is at 5:10, it's a traumatic event. So that's my little story of Oahu and the sunset and a little bit on the sunrise. I'll let Jonathan wind down and share how we can reach him, and maybe we'll connect in a few months and tap into some more conversation about some of these subjects.
No, I love that, Sifu. I appreciate that. You talked about your background. I'll talk about mine. It's not as long of a story as yours, but if you could see the colors there, this is actually the Northern Lights from East Tennessee. I lived in East Tennessee forever. I have never seen the Northern Lights in East Tennessee. And my mom sent me this a few months ago. She's like, "Have you seen this?" And I was like, "Holy crap." I was like, "That's the Northern Lights." She's like, "I've never seen it. It's so pretty." And I was like, "It is." So I just thought it was fascinating. I think it's just such a dynamic contrast of colors. I've seen the green. I've never seen the green and purple. So I thought that was really cool.
Are you from Tennessee?
I am. I'm from East Tennessee. My Southern accent comes on real thick if I talk to her, but other than that, I try to get rid of it as much as I can. I had some problems in the military. I remember I was in a training program with Senior Master Sergeant, who was it? Since, and he looked at me and he's just like, "You talk so slow." And I was trying to ask what I felt was an educated question. It was like important to, like, it was a lock picking, and I was trying to figure out how to get the tumblers done. And he just like lit me up. So ever since then, I just try to work on articulation and speeding up the words. But every now and then I'll slip up, and it just sounds like one long word with no spaces, and no one knows what it means. But yeah, so you can find me at normalizeptsd.com. I'm on all social media platforms. You can find me on any of them. I'm probably most active on Instagram. I find Facebook a little bit challenging, a lot of robots and a lot of just random stuff. So yeah, hit me up, hit an email. If you ever want to talk mental health, I'd love to jump on here and talk more about it. And really, I thought this was a really fun and interesting conversation. I enjoyed it.
That's wonderful. And if you want to tap into some of my modalities of mind, body, and spirit healing for your podcast or any summits that you're putting together, I'd be more than happy to do that. I've got a really cool talk that I give on intuition and how to tap into our intuition, and how animals use their intuition to find food, to find mates, to find safety, all these types of things. To find where they need to bed down, et cetera, et cetera. And so how we can do that, and I'm sure in the military, you folks had to tap into your intuition quite a bit to just survive, right?
Right. It's funny you say that. I talked to a guy named John Kennedy, and he does a lot of stuff with traumatic brain injuries and basically heightening your intuition, because he believes that intuition is just the brain's ability to process information at a very high rate of speed. And I was like, I like this idea. And he had a program that he did with the Marines. He's like, how does submarines were able to identify, nope, we're not going down that route because it looks hazardous, whereas others don't identify that and they go through it and they get hit with an IED. So what he did is he challenged me to do this brain test that he had, and I will admit, after only about 3 to 4 sessions with him, I was processing information a lot faster. I really struggle with reading aloud if I have to read off like a script of sorts. So a lot of times I have to do safety briefs in my industry, and after his that test, and after about a week of it, I was able to not only read without stuttering, skipping, mistakes. I was like halfway down the page and still able to read. It was just the
Wow.
way that it was so effective and so fast. So I think your intuition, something that you can heighten and get better at for sure.
Yeah, maybe you could email me that person's contact information, and if he wants, we could put it in the comments below the video. But I'd love to tap into him and maybe have him on the podcast and check out what his training is all about. I'm very interested in that subject. So I'm Sifu Slim, folks. Please give us a thumbs up and subscribe, and share your comments down below, and check out Jonathan Sheridan's work on his Instagram. And we'll see you in the next video. Jonathan, big aloha, and good luck in your jiu-jitsu and in your business and in your journey with friends and family.
Aloha nui. I appreciate it. Thanks, sir.
Take care, brother. Adios.
All right.